Hello and welcome to Amer's podcast. My name is Amer, and today with me is Adrian Hornsby. Adrian, welcome to the show.
Hi, Amer. Thanks for having me.
It's been a while since we've talked. How are you doing?
I'm great. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. I left AWS with January, and now it's March 11. It feels time flies. So, but yeah, I've kept busy. Starting to build my own business, and I'm having a lot of conversation with different people. My goal was to get some time and let serendipity happen, and it's happening. So that's great.
Awesome. Yeah. And for the people that don't know you, could you tell you a little bit about yourself and your background and what you do now?
So my background is actually in research. I did an exchange program with Finland. I'm French, half English, and I did an exchange program with Finland. It was like 23 years ago, at the university, and I did basically in research, and I worked a lot with Nokia research back then on multimedia system. Networks like sensor networks when before IoT was a thing and all this kind of stuff, especially low power one. So we and things like this. And then eventually I joined Nokia Research Center for a few years. Did some work there as well on distributed systems, multimedia systems, and the homes and the home experience, multimedia experience in the homes, stuff like that. And then a lot happened, and the whole research center in kind of got fired. Um, and then I transitioned into startups. So I went to work with a few different startups, building white label applications for mobile operators, and that for a few years. And then I worked into video, uh, kind of business to consumer video product as well, building applications, backend systems, focusing on resilience, especially, and all this kind of stuff. Having multiple hat, from backend to front end, uh, things like this, and then eventually joined AWS. So almost nine and a half years ago as solutions architect within AWS. Then I moved to developer relations for a few years, and then ended up in engineering as principal engineer. And yeah, I worked with the AWS fault injection service, which was initially named simulator but renamed service. And yeah, so focused mostly on operational excellence, resilience, reliability, all this kind of stuff, and of course chaos engineering. Yeah, so I kind of there you go, 20 something years of experience in three sentences.
Yeah, it's always hard to do to where to start, right? That's the end of the thing.
Very difficult.
So you mentioned resilience in there,
Yeah.
and I wanted to touch a little bit of, well, we're gonna touch upon it a lot in this podcast, but how did you get into that space? Because like resilience engineering and those kind of things, what motivated you for that? Because it's kind of a, I feel sometimes it's a little bit overlooked. So
Yeah.
I was wondering
Completely overlooked.
why, yeah, I was wondering how you got into
Through pain, pain and suffering.
it.
I guess like most organizations that get into resilience, initially it's often through pain. So it was an outage, like uh, so it was like well, about 15 something years ago, big outage, and yeah, I mean it's I don't know. I had deleted the database in production. That's the gist of what happened. Uh, yeah, there was some issues. I was trying to fix the issues. From it was Sunday evening. I was very tired. I had been debugging all weekend and stuff like that. You know how it goes when you're a startup. You kind of you just do so much and yeah, then we kind of something that was supposed to be rather small, and then ended up deleting a database in production because of all the factors, that were there, tiredness. The tools were just so permissive. I could do whatever I wanted without having having any warnings that I was doing something stupid or yeah. So it's like anyway, long story short, I deleted the data was in production, and from there I found, you know, rather than being fired, actually we tried to figure out how to improve from there, right? It really that got me into the rabbit hole of understanding how to prevent, have a proactive approach to system resilience, and not trying to react. And I've been fascinated by a few aspects of it. Of course, the technological aspect of how do you build systems that can withstand errors, issues, failures. How do you potentially build degradation path into those systems, but also the human part of it, the social technical
Mm.
system, and you know why why did I do what I did? I got really fascinated about what got me into deleting that database, and because I had all the good intention, I really wanted to do great, and as much as I felt terrible, and I still feel bad about it, like 20, 15 years later, it was not my fault. It was the condition that were so that was such that mistake was going to happen one way or another. It just happened to be that one. But anyway, so I found that paper that got me into resilience, and it was a summary discussion of John Osborne with Jesse Robbins and a few others, and they were I'd written a summary discussion. I think it was ACM. I can send you the link, so maybe you can post it in
Yeah, I
with the
would.
podcast. And yeah, and from there, John was talking about blameless postmortems. So kind of we picked that up in the company. And then what was super interesting is Jesse Robbins, who was uh, working with Amazon, was working on something that he was calling game days, right? And which is
Mm.
large scale exercise to make Amazon.com resilient to failures. And then yeah, that got me into the rabbit hole. That's it. That paper never got out of it. I'm still deep in that hole. And
Mm.
yeah, that was pretty awesome. It was basically a personal quest to never make that mistake again, and continuously improve and learn from that failure, right? And so that's pretty much it. And yeah,
Mm.
and in the last 10 years, I've made that my focus basically, right? I've started to talk about it. Then I wrote open source tools to do chaos engineering. These tools got some traction, and eventually I was asked to join, to co-write the narrative to start FIS. And that
Mm.
narrative was not written by me, but I was asked to participate in there. And then yeah, eventually when that narrative got approved, narrative is basically a, a, a paper, kind of collections of papers, really long one, which asks the business or makes the business case for having a chaos engineering service,
Mm.
and that got approved. And I was asked to join that team as a dotted line initially. I did the launch with the team. I provided part of the tools that I'd written open source, actually made it to FIS, and we made it production ready, of course. And then yeah, and then eventually I was asked to join the team as principal engineer, and then yeah,
Yeah.
that was my last 4 years basically. So
Yeah, it's funny how a deleted database changes your life, but it's a
yeah, it did,
but,
yeah. And actually I did
yeah.
it twice, but let's say the first time was that.
And I think one thing you mentioned is interesting is also the human aspect of it, of resilience. I think people tend to think like, okay, we can just solve it like high availability, disaster recovery, do all those kind of things, and then we're good, right? The technological piece will take care of itself.
Yeah,
But we sometimes forget that there's a human piece to it as well, where someone can just do something, and
yeah.
it will bring something down.
Yeah, but actually, I would say human part of it is most important part. You
Mm,
know, I think, and that's actually one of the biggest problem challenge with resilience is that I think there's this mismatch between what engineers think about resilience, because engineers, software developer love to think about resilience and have a technical solution to resilience, but often
exactly.
it's a human solution, or at least the human is part of the of the system as the white system. So
Mm.
yeah, it's definitely a big part of it.
This is the thing, right? It's there's also sometimes when you think about things, it's like yes, the technological part is important, but there is a
Mm,
process below all these kind of things, right? Where people do particular things, like they
yeah.
do deploys, they do uh, well, I hope they don't do that too often, but they sometimes log into a database server and those kind of things, right? It's
Yeah.
it happens, and how well I've had it I think we talked about this once on a LinkedIn post as well, but I've had it at a previous company way back when, where I did something, deleted a database as well, because I
Mm,
just wasn't paying attention. I was switching between test and production,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
those things happen, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
That's kind of thing. And
Yeah.
how do you make that resilient, that
Yeah.
particular process as well? It's not just the technological
Mm.
piece if someone else can just do a command, right?
Yeah, and there's a very interesting paradox here is that while we would, while we really want to prevent this kind of mistakes, we also don't necessarily want to prevent an engineer and operators to do it.
Mm,
There's something that it, for example, like, you know, I had no idea I was in the production environment, right? I was like you, my terminals were open, connected to the database. I was,
mm,
debugging some stuff, then testing in in my local environment, then in staging, and then my terminal basically looked the same. I had the same naming conventions, I had the same colors, I had everything the same. It was just a small prod versus test, right? And
mm,
when you're tired, you switch, and then you could overreact and think, okay, this should never happen, right? And then you prevent that, and then you say no, never again. But that can become a problem as well, right? When you have a big outage, then you might actually want to be able to do this, right? So you need to be very careful about about that. This is why it's so complicated, right? It's not just something that you want to prevent. It's something that you want to think about and make sure that you allow this flexibility while being able to prevent and make sure that the operator doing the part of the maintenance work or anything, right, can do what it needs in a situation that potentially critical, like an outage, right? Like when you have an outage, time to recover is very important, right? So you don't want to
mm.
start spending 3 days of getting the authorization to connect to your production, right? In that situation, you need to be able to do it quickly and trust that the operator knows what they're doing. The problem is, like, how do you make sure that the operator has all the context, at hand, clear, and to make those decisions, right? It's very interesting aspect of resilience, right?
It's super fascinating, and now that you're talking about it, I keep thinking about like it's really a delicate balance here. Like
Yeah,
you want it to be secure, you want to be resilient, but you also don't want it to be so secure and so resilient that you cannot do something in case of an emergency. Yeah,
yeah. So
that's another
robust.
thing.
So this is the robustness versus resilience, right? Like resilience, you create what's called an adaptive capacity in your system, which is a
Mm,
way for your system to adapt to changes, surprises, and unexpected things, right? And the more rigid you make that capacity to be adaptive, the more rigid it is, the harder it is to adapt, right? That's basically, you can think about it as robustness, which is, that's it. You want a strong system, which is, yeah, a desirable property. But the problem is no matter how much money you put into having robust systems, eventually something will happen, right? And at that moment,
Mm,
you want that flexibility. So that's why it's such a hard, it's just, a sweet balance between having robust properties and then, an adaptive capacity to it, or resilient property. And often people make that mistake where they have an outage and then they overreact with building very, very strong, robust system out of it to try to prevent failures. And then
mm,
it doesn't do its job, right? It actually often creates more processes, for operators to do what they need to do when they need to do it, and eventually it fails, right? And then everybody's having a Pikachu face, like, okay, we invested so much time and money in building a robust solution, and we still fail. So okay,
mm,
that something is wrong. But so this is why there's it's very it's kind of, yeah, it's a very difficult thing. It's nothing trivial to
mm,
build, and it depends on organization. I always say it depends on three things, right? The cultures, the tools, and the process. It's like really the interconnection of those three that make resilience like possible, because you can have strong tools, that's great, but if you don't have processes or what we call mechanism to use those tools in a safe and or in a safe way, or to make sure that those tools do their job, then it doesn't work. And the same, if you don't have the right culture, non-blaming culture, learning, like all these kind of things that make an organization resilient and then ready to admit that failures are going to happen, but what we want to focus is adapt quickly, then just the tools won't make it. So you need the whole package, and that's why it's so difficult, because I see companies, they take a provider or technology to fix their problem and it never works, right? And then they
yeah,
wonder why. So that's
yeah.
why it's difficult.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's no one size fits all for these kind of things. Because
No,
again, if you're right, it's kind of a if it's if you just do one or the other, you're never gonna get fully there, right?
no,
That's just not gonna work.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
what I because people can see you're very passionate about resilience, I think. But
Oops.
no, it's good. I love it.
Yeah,
And you started actually to switch up the topic a little bit. You started a newsletter
yeah,
called Resilience Bites,
yeah.
uh, which I'm definitely reading because I get a lot of insights from it. Um, what kind of what inspired you apart from your kind of love for resilience?
Yeah, see, I think there's few things, right? First, I love writing. It's just, it's something, credit to Julian Simon, actually, for that, who got me to start my Medium blog, I don't know, 7 years ago, something like 8 years ago. And yeah, after that, I just fell in love with writing. And yeah, so, I have my blog. And then I think it's just, I don't know, it's like, I have this mentor and coach inside me that always want to help some one way or another, and I think being able to share these nuggets of resilience, uh, is a good way to do it. My plan is really to curate all the stuff I'm reading about resilience and share it to everybody, so like you don't have to spend hours and hours to search the web. I'm you know I have my collections of bookmark which I anyway will go and read, because it's fascinating to see, and because learning is a continuous process, right? So I keep reading that stuff. So I thought eventually, why not share that that a curated list of interesting articles, so people don't have to waste time trying to read them. And then if it helps, my goal was, that's interesting, because when I wrote that the newsletter, somebody asked me uh, how we are define it as a success, and I was like, if one person tells me that it's been useful, then it makes my day. And that's that and that happened on the first time I posted, so that was good. So I
Yeah.
continue to do it, and it's also it's a cool process for me as well, right? I think like Amer, you having processes in our life, it's like routines or so. For me, it forces me to learn as well, right? So adding that process also forces me to go and read and continuous continuously learn, right? And not just rest on my on what I've learned in the past. So I think it's also forcing me into that a learning habit. So kind of all that kind of stuff, and also eventually create this little community of people that if I can help people
Mm.
in that are in this newsletter to maybe find a job that they like, or connect to people, which already started to happen. No, so that kind of a whole package a little bit. How
Yeah.
about you? Why
I,
did you start the podcast? Is probably
well,
something
this
similar, right?
I wanted to say that actually because you're right in the sense that so I work a little bit in the same way where I need to have some sort of however you want to call it, let's stick behind the door, whatever. It's like
Mm,
to keep me going. So if
yeah.
I say for example with the podcast, I say okay, I'm gonna release one every 2 weeks.
Mm,
I have set that kind of goal for myself. I'm gonna do one
yeah.
every 2 weeks, and so for the people that don't know, I had a podcast before my current job, and I did like I think I did like 90 episodes or so
Oh
in
wow.
like a year and a half, 2 years. Um, and well, that one was every week, which was even more grueling because like you need to find some. The hardest part is actually finding guests and those kind of things
Yes, yeah.
to get to and scheduling. But it I'm doing the podcast because I just have an interest in talking to people around all kinds of different topics,
Mm-hmm.
and the I think the love you have, for example, for writing, I have for like doing these kind of things,
Very nice.
where I feel like this is something that I can provide value to others as well, and
Yes.
exactly the same thing like you said. Like if one person comes to me and says like I've been enjoying the episodes and I
Yeah.
really listen to every one of them, you don't have to, but if they say that, uh, then my job is done. Like
Yeah.
if it doesn't have to be a very large
Mm,
audience or whatever like that.
yeah.
But yeah, yeah, setting that kind of whatever you want to call it, a goal or a mechanism or whatever, like of doing one every two
Mm,
weeks,
yeah, that's
it
a
kind
good
of
goal.
pushes me to say like, okay, I have to keep going and keep
Yeah.
finding people for, and
And I bet you
it's
learn
not
a
easy.
lot during those podcasts because people are so
Oh,
different, right? So like, it's a good way for you to actually
absolutely.
get new ideas as well and kind of learn.
Absolutely. So
Mm.
usually when my head hurts after a podcast, that's good because I've been
So should
thinking a lot.
so I'll ask you at the end if it hurts.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but so this is all of it. This is the
Awesome.
reason, and it's like and it's similar, very similar, I think,
Yeah.
to why you're doing the newsletter as well.
Mm.
So I wanted to I'm gonna link to the newsletter just so people have it
Nice.
in the show notes. Um, I wanted to ask a little bit about future stuff as well, right? Because a lot has changed in resilience, like people using cloud and those kind of things already changed
Yeah.
resilience quite a lot. What do you see kind of in the next few years? Because okay, I didn't want to start about Gen AI, but it is something that's going on, of course. But
Gen
are
what?
there
Gen what?
never heard of it. Huh?
Uh,
But what do you see kind of what kind of trends do you maybe see that
yeah.
are changing in the resilience field?
Yeah, it's a great question, and yeah, I think we can't avoid AI, right? I think there's gonna be a yeah, and it started already. I see a lot of SRE DevOps, folks in that field using LLMs and stuff like this to to make sense of data, to create new tools to help. So I'd say a greater integration of AI tools with resilience practice. You know, But there's also another thing, right? I see a lot of companies now using AI to build systems, right? And that's great, but it's kind of creating black box complexity, right?
Mm,
So basically, and this AI system makes all the decisions for you, right? So you end up with a black box which has, a set of potential default value that the AI system decided, hey, this seems like good value for you, and that's it. Now here's your system. Go and play with it. How long do you think that's going to work for you, right? It will work for a month, maybe, 10 users, 100 users, 1,000 users. Your system needs to adapt, right? Like it's a system constantly has to adapt. There's never a time where systems just, or rarely a system stays still or never change, right? Whether it's a
mm,
bug, whether it's a change in the library, the underlying operating system, the hardware, something changes, adapts, right? And and when this needs to happen, often it needs human intervention, human understandings. Efficiency is going to be an important thing here as well. Reliability is important. So AI systems are great. They create all those black box, but eventually, I think we're gonna we we're gonna have to focus on making that system truly resilient. And in a way, it's like, how do you incorporate human in there? How do you know, kind of how the systems are gonna work with humans in when shit hits the fan, right? So because the systems are gonna fail as well, and
mm,
if you're gonna have to wait for an outage to learn how your system works so that you can actually make the change necessary, all that's gonna be a problem, right? So
mm,
I recently wrote a blog post about actually using chaos engineering to make sense of that complexity, because when AI builds a system, a very good way to understand how that system was built and the kind of the defaults that were set in place, especially exposing them, is actually to inject some issues there, some faults, some problems, and experiment with the system so that you can start to expose this hidden complexity, and at least understand how systems are, understand the decision that have been made for you, right, on your behalf. So I think we're going to see that, uh, definitely, because because complexity is going to increase, especially it's going to be hidden. Uh, there's going to be potentially more metastable failures, right? Where because systems are even more interconnected, and so I think there's going to be some investment that has to be made in understanding those new metastable failures, like agent based. Uh, you know, a lot of the patterns of uh, with agent based distributed systems, what kind of failures we're going to see, and actually trust is going to be a very important issue there. If a system
mm,
tells you, like it hallucinates when you ask it to do something, like how do you operate that system, right? So
mm,
maybe I think there's going to be it's going to be interesting to see that. In the 70s there was a paper called it was like, what was it, the about issues with automations, right? And
mm,
exactly that the more automated the systems become, the more um, uh, specific or very talented, or like uh, how was it, like a specialist the operator is gonna
mm,
have to fix those systems, right? So AI makes that even more critical. So I think resilience is gonna have a big part to play here. Eventually, I think I've wrote as well this recently. We're gonna see like chief resilience officers coming, because it's gonna be even more important. And then kind of resilience is still something that is reactive. It's not proactive. Now it's
Mm.
changing because, like regulation just changing. Like recently in UK, like past months, there's been uh, kind of few outages as well that have been really expensive for banks, and so all these kind of things make customers can't use their services when they need to. That creates a lot of problems. So eventually, at some point, hopefully they're gonna realize resilience is important. So I see the change already. Like 5 years ago, it was much harder to talk about resilience. It was not something that was in every discussion. Now it's in every discussion. Now the question is, okay, you talk about it, but do you invest about it? So we're still, at this trade-off between, okay, let's talk about it and then move to let's invest. I think there's still a lot of reactive versus proactive resilience here. So maybe I see this. I see chaos engineering is going to mature also. Like it's been 10 years. It's a slow beast, right? But I think 10 years
Mm.
ago almost nobody talked about chaos engineering. 5 years ago people got interested into it more, and now I see a lot of organization are actually using it. Yeah, and so and actually being very very good at it, like doing amazing things. Now the thing is, it's often also within part of the organization. They have trouble scaling that to the rest of the organization. Often that's a problem. So I've written a lot about this, how to do this successfully, and things like this, because I've worked with few
Mm.
organizations that have done that. But that's a big challenge. So hopefully, we can have models or kind of playbooks to really scale things across organizations that are more akin to security. Cyber security, cyber resilience, is, and just traditional resilience. They all fight against what's called the prevention paradox. It's like,
Mm.
uh, when I always give the example of the year 2000 bug. We spent years, like years and years preparing for it, right? And then when year 2000 came, well, nothing happened. And of course, everybody said, "Oh, everybody overreacted."
Mm.
It was not so important. But that's prevention paradox, because there's nothing, no problem. So you think, "Oh, it's not useful." But no, that's actually
Yes.
what was prevention. It was prevention at work, and it worked. Like nothing happened because people did the work, proactively to address the problem, right? But it
Mm.
news were all over the place saying, "Oh, everybody overreacted. We didn't have to do this. We wasted so much money." That's prevention paradox, and that touches resilience all the time, because when you prevent an outage from happening, it's very difficult to quantify what you've prevented because it didn't happen,
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
right? So it's
it's
crazy.
in general, I think. Yeah, it's whenever you prepare for something and it doesn't happen, people are like, yeah, it wasn't that bad. Like,
Yeah.
uh, totally different topic, but it happens in public speaking as well, quite a lot,
Hmm.
where you prepare a presentation, we've rehearsed it and those kind of things, and then time comes, you're nervous about something going wrong, and everything goes well, and nobody
Hmm.
even noticed it, right? So people are like,
Exactly.
yeah, it's like effortless, and but
Yeah.
this just doesn't
They
work that
don't
way.
see the hours and hours you spend preparing, crying at home, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I've been there, done that, man. Like, it's so crazy. It's
Yeah,
when
exactly.
everything goes well, it's so difficult to explain that you've put so much work into
Mm.
preparing for it, right? So hopefully we that's gonna be something people talk more about. It's definitely gonna be a big part of what I'm gonna talk this year about, because I see this as a big problem.
Mm.
I've been trying to think about it, uh, to make it more prevalent. So maybe I'm not going to talk too much about that. Maybe some other time. But yeah, it's something that I'm thinking a lot about.
Mm.
Just to do that, to say this, and then
Yeah.
yeah, like integration, chaos engineering with load testing. Still, those practices are separated they need to be together, right? Because that's really the best way to do both. So, and I start to
Mm.
see companies doing that in the space, and then eventually, uh, yeah, resilience becomes just a bit more like a casual discussion rather than an exotic topic.
Yeah, it's hard to I think what people have struggles with is hard to quantify kind of the the outcome or the value of it, right? That I
Hmm.
think that's where it goes wrong quite a bit is
Yeah,
um, because everything goes well, well, it's not an issue, right? Then
mm, exactly.
we can maybe we can even get rid of that second database that we have running somewhere else,
Yeah,
right? That's
and
what people slip into.
yeah, yeah, and you see this happen all the time, right? Or why should we train? Because our team is great, right? Why should we do game
Mm,
days? Because we're good. Why should we do that? I think that the big problem is is very similar to what security was 10 years ago. Is like people were
mm,
kind of balancing the need of security versus feature, right? So and the problem is security is a never-ending project, right? You start it and you never end it, right? So it's not like a feature development where you have a start date and an end date, right? So you can't compare them. It's like comparing apples to grapes
yes.
because they're completely different, or apple to pizza, so because they're not even the fruit. And resilience is the same, right? It's not a project that a company can take and say, oh, the sprint, we're going to do 2 weeks of resilience. No, that doesn't work. Like it needs to be incorporated in your daily operation practices. It's part of the DNA, the culture. It's a continuous process, just like security, you know, is resilience. And that's why actually even companies, especially financial sectors that I work with, often when you think about security or resilience, they bring the other topic, right? So if you talk about security, they'll talk about resilience. If you talk about resilience, they'll talk about cyber resilience or
Mm,
cybersecurity within the same language. And then kind of it's weird that we've talked so, for many years about resilience and security to be separate when actually it's the same thing, right? You can't, yeah, they're both victim of prevention paradox because when you invest in security and nothing happened, you can say, okay, why did we invest all that much into
yes.
security? Because we didn't
Exactly.
have any issue. It's the same thing with resilience, right? So I think they're like really like brother and sisters, fighting for the same recognition, uh, from the CEOs and things like this. So yeah, it's definitely I think gonna be an important aspect in the future to get those uh, be more aligned. Does it make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense actually. Now that you think about it, it's exactly the same issue where you don't see the effort, right? It's
Hmm.
uh yeah, we so someone would say, yeah, we never had a hack. Yeah,
Hmm.
because we did all this work up front and now we
Yeah,
don't, right? So
exactly.
that's
Yeah.
kind of the thing.
Yeah.
So I have
And
one
and
more question
often
before I
it's
let you.
and often it
Sorry,
starts
go
at the
ahead.
development, right? With the developers
Mm,
being very security heavy, having process of, when you launch software in production, you have security reviews, pen testing, all this kind of stuff, right? Part of your development process and not just an afterthought. So yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I cut you, buddy.
No, no, it's all good. I think that's a good addition to it. So I have one more question before I let you go, actually, Adrian.
Uh-oh.
And we had a fun time. So maybe we should do a part two whenever you have your thing going that you were talking about. But I would like to know who would you like to see on the podcast next as a guest?
Yeah, there's so many talented people, but I would say, I mean, I love Charity Major. She's CTO with Honeycomb. She's always saying
Hmm.
so many interesting things. You have Nora Jones, I think, founder of Jelly. If you want to continue to talk about this topic of
Yeah, why
resilience,
not?
she's more she especially incident response. I think was very very interesting. There's some was it like Laura Maguire? She's working on human factor research, human factor. I'm a big fan of her work as well.
Mm,
So all that, if you want to continue a little bit on the topic, and I kind of have a little bit more diverse set of people coming, that definitely those
absolutely.
are awesome people. And then if you have want some engineer, Tar Walker, it's amazing engineer at Microsoft, and yeah, like
Mm.
I mean, there's so many. Well, I can send you a big list
You're
of
gonna send me
folks.
a list, I know. It's all good. I think those are very very good suggestions because it's
Yeah,
I mean like we said or like I mentioned before as well. It's like such an underrated topic
yeah,
actually,
exactly.
where people don't think about it too much until it goes wrong,
Yeah,
until you get into the
exactly.
situation where you drop a database.
Yeah.
Then
Talking about
the
this, actually, Courtney Nash would be also very good for that.
mm,
She was working on, she's still, I think, working on the Void podcast and the Void report, which basically looks at all the incidents and then make suggestions. So like really
okay,
incident report. She's doing an amazing job there. She's also part of the Resilience Engineering Association. So
cool.
could be interesting for you to expand on the topic as well.
Awesome. Well, Adrian, there's not much more for me to do than to shout out again. You have a newsletter, Resilience Bites. I will
Thank you.
link that. That's one thing, and another thing. Thank you for your time. It was
Yeah,
great talking to you again.
it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and yeah, and good luck with the continuation of your podcast. I'll be
Thank you.
cheering for you on the side. All right, you take care, but
Thanks, Adrian.
bye
See
bye.
you later. Bye bye.